welcome to this lecture on Tangible and Embodied Interaction. Um, I must say from the start, I also gave a master's course on embodied interaction in which I dive much deeper into the topics of this lecture. And all of these lectures are also available online on YouTube. So I will post the link um, and also put it in the comments to this YouTube movie so that you can see more if you want. Um, so this is a lecture recorded initially for second year students in the University of Twente, and for those students I will shortly present myself. This is me, and if you are interested in any of the topics in this list or become interested at some point, um, you can always contact me for graduation projects, and so on. I'm always interested in doing cool stuff. So come see me if you like this. But now on to the lecture itself. Um, so in relation to the projects that you're doing, you're designing interactive systems of some sort, right? So, and the question that I would like to ask is, what is it like, or how does it feel to be in the activity of using a product or a system, or being in an interactive environment that you've designed? And then also looking at that within the complete real context and situation, right? So we are very much often focused on screens, or even if we make things, physical things, we are focused very much on the thing, and we sort of very often forget the context around it, right? We don't use screens in the void. We use them in spaces, in settings, in situations, and you need to look at the complete setting and then look at what your interaction that you designed is doing there, right? What kind of effect, what kind of impact does it have on our experience? And that's what we want to get clear about. But first things first, what is an interface? You may not always ask this question to yourself. You're designing interfaces, but you may not think about what do I actually mean with an interface. And I want to sort of tickle your mind a little bit to think a little bit more deeply about this question. Consider this object here, the Godray WMWTE or something. It's terribly expensive. It's 22,000. I don't know what exactly because I don't remember which country it's from, but it's 22,000 somethings, and so it looks very expensive. And actually, what could it be? Can you see from this object what it is? Well, as we cannot talk live at this moment, I will just um, spoil the secret for you. This is a washing machine. And if you have enough cash, you can pay on delivery in Tamil Nadu for this washing machine if you have 22,000 lying around. But the question that I want to ask here basically is, where is the interface of this machine? And if you don't think too much about it, you will probably say, well, the interface is here, right? It's this little screen here with the numbers and buttons and stuff and so on. That's the interface, right? So the interface designer would design this display here, right? Now, and that idea that the interface is there comes from certain images that we have, certain sort of mental models that we have about what interfaces are. And the most well-known one at this point is the graphical interface. It's actually a quite new mental model because it didn't exist for too long. Maybe it runs back to other mental models of, for example, the book or other kinds of things that we're used to. But at some point, we became used to the graphical interface, little icons and pictures on a screen that you could click and point to and press, right? And another bit older mental model that is related to it is the model of the control panel, right? So you have physical buttons on a box gathered together. Each button has a different function, and they connect somehow to machines, factory things. You operate things with them, right? So you press it, and then you set the master trim to the desired value, and then everything goes as it should, right? So these are very well-known sort of um, images, models that we have in our mind about what an interface is like. There's one other that we often forget. There's also the interface in the sense of a machine connection between two people at a distance, so they can communicate or interact with one another through this interface, right? So the telephone is the traditional, or the telegraph are old examples of this, and right now we have Skype and all kinds of on-screen interfaces that make us not operate a machine or activate a function, but instead what we do when we press a button or say something or do something with this interface, we interact directly, at least that's what it appears to us, right? With another person through the interface. So the interface is more like a channel of communication between two people. Now all these things are related, right? They all hang together somehow. You have the computer interface that makes a human interact through that interface, which is the orange thing here is the interface, to some digital information. You have the control panel, which is very much the same kind of logic. You have a human user on this side acting and getting feedback, but in this case, not from digital information inside a computer, but in this case, some kind of automated mechanical action. So there's some machine doing stuff for you, right? When you push the button, and then the machine will tell you what's happening through these numbers here. And then you have the interface where a human being is interacting through the screen or through the telephone or through the Morse code on the telegraph pole with another human being, right? So here the interface is between two human beings. So that's sort of, we all know about that, right? It's intuitive. It's at this point in our society, this is common sense, you could say. What about this interface though? This is a machine, so there's a control panel, right? So you could say, well, it's a control panel interface you just explained to me. But if you think about what the person in this crane is experiencing and feeling and seeing when they're doing that, their thing, and if they're very skilled in doing it, and this guy really looks very skilled in what he's doing, the interface is not really a button that you operate in order to set the machine in motion, right? It's different from this kind of machine. If I press a button here, I would expect that some kind of machine over there is going to do its thing, and it be rather outside of my control, right? I set it in motion, then it goes. But here I have these controls in hand, and I could do it, of course, but this guy can. Um, he's sort of he's operating the whole crane continuously, and he is the crane in a way, right? The whole crane becomes an extension, if you wish, of his own body, and he's looking down there. He's not looking at the panels and the buttons at all, at least most of the time. He's just directly manipulating some stuff over there, and the whole crane is more like a bodily extension of the person rather than some kind of distant machine that you activate with a button. Right? There's buttons and they do some activating stuff probably, but the most important part of this interface is to make your own body bigger so that you can act at a distance directly, right? And same thing here. If you look at blind man's cane, which is a famous example that philosophers have used many times, um, the blind man has, you could say, an interface to the world, which is this cane. But you could say, well, where does the interface begin, right? So where does the world, like where does the interface begin? You could say, well, the interface begins here his hand is touching the cane, and that is that's the interface. That's the moment, the touch where the person touches the cane, and then the cane on the other side touches the world, right? So and then the whole cane is the interface. But that's not how it feels, and that's not how it works, right? And what these philosophers like French guy Merleau-Ponty was saying is that actually you could say this person is feeling the world with the tip of the cane. And so, to all ends and purposes, what you should say is that the whole cane has become embodied or incorporated. The whole cane has become part of this person's body, just like the crane example I just showed. And actually, the end of this person, the whole person's body ends here, and there's no interface other than in the way that our whole body is, if you wish, an interface between us and the world, right? So, but it's certainly not the case that there's something in between this guy and the world. That is the cane. The cane is part of the guy, and the guy is interacting with the world through the cane. So this, what kind of interface is this? Or look, let's look at tables. Tables are fascinating. I'm always fascinated by tables. So a table is a physical place you can sit around and you can put stuff on the table. So that's handy. You don't have to put it on the ground and you don't have to bend over all the time or hold it in your hand all the time. You can put some stuff, your car keys and your phone on the table, right? And then grab them when you need them or a game. So that's one function of tables. But of course, a table is also kind of social organizing interface, right? It's almost like a telephone line between people in a way that, I mean, they can interact directly, but the table is doing some work here as to the social communication going on, right? So, for example, the table slightly inhibits a direct fight, right? You wouldn't go jumping over the table immediately. So when you become angry, you could stand up and bounce on the table, and then the other person could back off. But the table would still be a kind of a border, an interface, if you wish, between people, so that things don't get out of hand directly, right? You can look at other people, you can see if everybody's agreeing with what everybody's saying. So you have immediately sort of group forming around the table. Depending on the shape of the table, there's going to be head of the table. And if you sit there, you're going to be the boss and so on and so forth, right? So tables are very interesting interfaces, but they don't conform to this traditional model of having a button box where I push on something and then it goes to a machine or a computer on the other side. Not at all. Or what about this interface? Is this also an interface? I'm not saying it's an interface. I'm just asking some questions here. Like, this is a door. What's interesting about a door? Well, it's sort of an interface because I'm on this side and I could use the door to go to another world, if you wish, another environment, which is the world inside that door, right? If this would be in a game, it would definitely be an interface element to go through to another realm or whatever in a virtual game. But this is in the real world. It's the same thing. You stand on this side of the door, then you go through the door to the other side. But what is different about this interface relative to the other interfaces? Here, it's a thing. You don't press a button on this side and then something happens on the other side. No, it's literally an interface that you have to go through with your whole body in order to get to the other side. That's interesting too. And finally, what about this interface? Well, I have one more basically, but what about this interface? And I'm talking here about this traffic light here. You could say this is an interface, right? There's a face, and you can interact with it, and there's information on it, like red light, green light, and it's connected to a computer system. But if you look at this red light, are you really sort of interacting with the computer through this interface? Well, you could say at some technical level you are a user of a computer system, but that's not what it feels like, right? That's not how you would describe the function and the role and the way this thing plays. It does its thing in the situation and the context. The computer really is not important at all. There's no computer here. I mean, there is a computer, but it doesn't matter. It's just an implementation detail. It's just background technology. What happens here is that this interface is actually interacting between people. There's a whole bunch of people here trying to make sense of the situation, and making sense of the situation in this case means who gets to go first and who has to stop and who can drive and how do we together prevent accidents happening. And these lights here are mediating that. They are influencing the way people judge the traffic situation and make decisions about whether to move or whether to stop. So it's an interface, but it's an interface between people, and it's sort of in the background because you're not really conscious of it. It's not like a telephone that I'm talking in the telephone and it goes to the other side with it. I'm talking with the other traffic members. No, it's more like an ambient signal that you become fully automated in responding to. And meanwhile, you're also looking at the other people in the street and you prevent accidents from happening. If that is, you actually do what the traffic light says. And these people here from the city of Utrecht on their bikes are, I'm afraid, rather an exception to what I often see happening. But that's another matter. And then finally, we have this interface, which is, yeah, so you could say this whole dog, this robot dog, is an interface to a software system, right? Because there's a complex, complicated AI system inside the computer with all kinds of patterns and routines and rules for how to respond to the sensory stimuli that's coming in, sound and vision and so on. But to the kid, of course, the robot is not an interface to a software. The kid is not talking with a software. The kid is talking with this actual dog. So here you could say the whole object is the interface to itself, right? To the dog, right? It would be, I mean, you could say, well, yeah, the whole body is an interface to the mind of the dog or something like that, or the personhood or the selfhood of the dog or what have you. But these are all philosophical niceties. The whole thing here is that this dog is just this thing is what it is, and the kid is interacting with the whole thing. So this is a smart object, and the kid is interacting with the smart object, and you could very well ask the question, does the word interface still make sense here to use it at all? Do we need the word interface to explain what's happening here between the kid and the dog? Actually, this is the only thing I'm going to say about robots because most of the students listening to this lecture will get lots of other lectures about robots, so I won't go into that here. Anyway, so in general and in conclusion, there is a lot of interaction going on in all these weird examples that I just gave, but they don't fit the model that I gave earlier. So what exactly is the interface here? And I don't have the exact answer to that, but I'm just trying to provoke you a little bit in thinking about this word interface. So what is an interface? Well, as I said, I don't have the exact answer, but in the most general sense, I think you're safe to go if you would define it a little bit like this. Interface is everything which is at or on the product, and that's the whole thing, physical, graphical, moving, sound, what have you, everything. Everything that the user can interact with and which contributes to the user experience. Yeah? So in the case of the washing machine, right, we first thought that this little display here was the interface. And of course, that's the usual way of talking about it, right? And if you go to an interface company, they would immediately start to think about how to change this little display here. But in fact, if you went to a really good interface design company, and they would probably not call themselves interface design company, but just design bureau, and if you would go there and if you'd ask them, can you redesign the interface? They would consider the whole thing to be the interface, right? What it looks like, the fact that there's a glass top here, through which you can look at the wash, the actual clothes tumbling around, The fact that the thing maybe moves a little bit when it's going, so you can see that it's active. It probably makes sounds, not only beep and bloop sounds, but also just mechanical sounds from the motor running and the whole thing going. So the whole experience of it helps you make sense of what this thing is doing and what you should do in interaction with it, right? Is it finished? Is it still going? Is it okay? Is there something wrong? Everything that you can interact with on this thing is the interface. And as a designer, maybe you don't always have the influence to design everything, but you should, in any case, be aware and conscious of the fact that in the end, for the user, everything is the interface. So this means that you actually want to design not just for functionality, not just a row of buttons that each activate a different function, but you want to take a much broader view and design for a complete user experience, right? And the experience is not just cognitive, it's not just about information exchange, but it's also about what kind of feeling does it give you, what kind of um, um, yeah, what also the action aspect. So what, given the way the product appears, what do you see as able to be doing with the thing? How can you manipulate the object? How can you get control and grip on what you're doing, and so on and so forth. So it's a complete experience of interaction. Now, if you think about designing for experiences, one of the things to be aware of is that suddenly it also means that the user has much more freedom of interacting with your product than you may have thought. So you have designed the product for a certain purpose or function, but given the fact that the whole product in all its aspects is inviting interactions in different ways, you're never sure what people are actually going to do with your object, right? So what is this? Well, this is a trash can. So what do you do with it? Well, you walk up to it and you throw stuff in here, right? Your trash. Well, actually, people do all kinds of things with it, right? And you couldn't really imagine that up front. Well, you could if you do good research to it. You may be able to predict some of this stuff, and it's also good to do that because some of the stuff you don't want to happen, right? On the other hand, sometimes it's also just a matter of letting go of control and saying, okay, well, if kids want to play on the trash can, why not, right? What's the big deal here? And what you can also see is that it matters a lot whether this trash can is very close to something other that makes certain actions possible. And of course, the designer of this pole is not the designer of the trash can, right? So they never communicated about this possibility. Okay, so that's the general introduction to the way I at least look at interaction design. Now let's look a little bit more in depth into this thing called tangible and embodied interaction. What is that all about? Well, if you look back at this again at this washing machine, there's something about this washing machine which I really don't like, apart from the fact that I don't know if I like red washing machines, but aesthetic question maybe. I actually do like that you can look at it from the top instead of from the front, but um, there's something else that is a problem. And the problem is that the interface is pretty much completely disconnected from the machine in terms of its functioning. And we're so used to this that you probably don't even notice this anymore as a problem, right? DVD recorders, um, television, all kinds of machines that we have in our homes. They have microwaves. They have a display of buttons, and there's the machine itself, and the two things are disconnected from each other. This has to do with many things. It has to do with, for example, the, the practical um, the practical thing that digital control has developed in industry as a different kind of practice and a different kind of profession than physical product design. So the people that are designing the washing machine are not the people that are designing the display. And it's just different, maybe it could even be different companies doing that, right? And then putting them together. So what you get is very ugly interfaces, digital interfaces that are just stuck on the mechanical object, right? And what you actually want to do here is if you're a good designer, you want to look at the whole experience of it, but you also want to have some kind of coherence and completeness of this object and say, okay, if this is a washing machine, it's going round. I'm standing for. There's a way in which I put the laundry in and out, and given from that activity, from the practice of using a washing machine and doing laundry, could I could I design the controls, the digital controls, in a way that sort of makes sense given the whole activity and actually the purpose and the meaning of this object, right? Because this interface could be anything, right? It could be a control for an airplane or a drone for all I know. I mean, so there's nothing in this interface which relates to what the thing actually is, and that's also confusing to people, right? We learn to deal with this, but this is always a display that we have to look at and figure out, like what button do we need to, and this is because the buttons don't have any inherent relation. The shape of the buttons and the position, the icons, they don't have an inherent relation to what the machine is actually doing. So could we create products that are more so coherent and unified and create one holistic user experience, right? That it's one thing, like the robot dog, which is in a way a complete system, much more than this thing. Now there's several ways to go about doing that, and one is called tangible interaction, and I want to start with that first. So tangible interaction is a certain development from late 1990s and then into the 2000s. And as from 2007, there's been a conference on tangible interaction. And the idea here is, as Hiroshi Ishii, one of the founders of this field, says, to give physical form to digital information and computation, taking advantage of the human abilities to grasp and manipulate physical objects and materials. Right, so the digital information, we're gonna make it physical so that you can use your physical body. And the way that people have been evolved over thousands of years, millions of years, to deal with material physical objects. I mean, that's what we're good at, right? That's what our brains are made for. To use that in order to interact with digital information in a more intuitive way, right? And Scott Klemmer says at some point, solutions that carefully integrate the physical and digital worlds are likely going to be more successful by admitting improvisations of practice that the physical world offers. So there's also some like the children standing on the garbage can. There's also a little bit of openness to it, right? If you make things physical, then people can sort of play around, explore, try things out. Whereas if you have one digital button and you press it, then before you know it, things go wrong and you can't go back and so on and so forth. And at the bottom there's some words that you might want to use if you want to Google this and find out more. So just a little bit about the history because we don't have too much time, but there have been some early interesting experiments. There was this Durrell Bishop who made an answering machine in the time that people had these complicated answering machines on their phones, and they had to push all kinds of buttons to get to message number 3 and delete it or store it or listen to it again. You had to go back into the menu, and you got lost all the time pressing the buttons. So he just made every message a marble that would come out, a physical marble, like an actual physical marble, come out the machine, and you could very easily take the third marble and listen to it again. It would be a trivial action at the moment every message is a marble in a tray, right? So this physicality made the interaction with the digital information much easier.
PM.
Hi Simon, it's about 1 o'clock now. I was wondering whether you're going to come to the football. It's the weather's a bit wet and rainy, so I understand if you don't. Other than that, well, yeah, give us a ring if you're in. Okay, bye.
PM.
Hi Emma, it's Val.
3:30 PM. Hello, a message for Simon Phipps. Your flight is BA 6213 at 12:30, Monday the 15th of October. Your job number is BS 436215, and the pickup address is 44 Camden Mansions, Kensington Mall. Bye. 2:45 PM.
Hello Simon, it's George. Could you give us a ring? My tone number is... Talk to you later. See you. Bye.
There was also the live wire, which was a cool experiment. The wire started to spin louder, harder, and so you could see it better. It started to spin when there was more Wi-Fi. So suddenly the people in the office would sort of get an intuitive sense by this wire. It's more like an art project, but they would get an intuitive sense of how much internet are we using, right? Because internet is Wi-Fi, wireless internet, it's invisible, right? And suddenly it became visible, the amount of processing going on, or data. Anyway, so here's an the MetaDesk by Brick Ulmer and Hiroshi Ishii is an important one. Um, it was a map of the MIT campus, and with tangible controls, you could do stuff on the map, like zoom in and zoom out and so on. And one cool feature, for example, was the Great Dome of MIT that everybody knows was a way to always get back to the central orientation. If you got lost on the map, you would take the Great Dome, put it right in the middle, and the whole thing would instantly scale to the Great Dome, which was sort of a digital, physical digital equivalent of the idea that if you are lost in a city, what do? You look at the church tower, right? And at the MIT campus, everybody always looks at the Great Dome. Like, where am I? Oh, yeah, there's a Great Dome, so my lecture is over there. And another cool one, also by Hiroshi Ishii's lab, by Brave and Daly, was In Touch. So this was a communication device, like a telephone, but instead of sending messages, words to another, you would just analog live feel each other. So if I would roll the rollers here, somebody else would immediately feel it, and in reverse. So it was also called In Touch. It was not about sending messages or giving digital orders to a digital system or something like that. It was about just being in touch with each other, which was a really different way of thinking about interaction. So these were some early experiments, and yeah. So what is the core idea of this tangible interaction? Well, this is a nice example, I think, under Kofler illuminated workbench. So you see here a projection of digital information, and then tangible controls for manipulating that digital information that you can see. And in this case, the idea was that this is a simulation of a laser. So here on the left you have the laser, and it sends out a laser beam light, but that is digital, right? So it's not real laser. And then all these objects here, they play the role of mirrors, reflecting and so on, or semi-transparent and so on. And what you can do with this is, if you are a student of laser and light and reflection, if you do optics, you could actually use this system to try out and figure out. So improvisation of practice, you could just play around with this system and get a feel for it, which was really much more difficult than by just looking at these static pictures or even videos, and by reading text and doing just the mathematics, right? So you could sort of get a sense for the mathematics by manipulating these objects. Now, of course, you can also do that with a real laser, but these were also often very expensive, difficult to operate, and sometimes even very dangerous. So in this way, lots of students can get a very good, sort of almost a skilled way of, they would sort of develop a know-how for lasers rather than purely abstract theoretical knowledge. Another great example is siftables, and I put some YouTube links here that you can click on, which I will also put in the slides and in the course website. The idea here is that these are all little screens, but every screen reacts to what is happening on the other screen. So there's rules, simple rules, that if on the left there's another siftable that has this picture, then I'm going to do this. And if on the right there's a siftable with this picture, I'm going to do that. So you'd have, for example, you could do document processing with this, or you could make a little computer program with it, or you could do arithmetic, like 1 + 1 =, and so on and so forth for children. So you combine the power of digital information and screens with the way in which we are very intuitive in dealing with objects, because you could very easily play around with these objects and change them, right? And it's much more easier than try to do that in a graphical way. Now I will also share with you this video of the project Inform, also by Hiroshi Ishii. And this is sort of the ultimate future fantasy of his, in which everything physical becomes also connected to digital operations. So you could manipulate complete environments like chairs, desks, walls. So basically everything around you could change form depending on computational rules, and the whole world would become a tangible interface to the digital world. So what's the power of the tangible? Well, the added value of tangible interfaces over graphical interfaces hinges on a couple of points. It makes use of our rich bodily skills, right? We have evolved our brains. I sometimes say our brains are not evolved for sitting still behind a screen, pushing a limited number of buttons and thinking about what button means what. That's not how our bodies work at all. Our bodies have evolved to sit on a horse holding a spear, trying to catch the running bison and throw the spear in the right way, right? So that's what our bodies have evolved for. So if you want to design good interfaces, you better use those bodily skills in a smart way. And what you can do then, if you once you are using those bodily skills, is that you can offload some of our thinking to the environment. So you make, as it were, you make interacting with the computer easier because I can physically move things around, which is just an easier thing for my brain to do than having to think about the right choices to make in my head. And even seeing it physically, graphically on the screen is of course easier than just having to type commands, but it's still more difficult than really using physical objects. And you can use existing skills and practices, so things that are in the culture, how we manipulate physical objects. You can use those as metaphors for now interacting with new interactive information, digital information. And finally, just like the table, you can use tangible interaction to connect people by creating a shared workspace, right? If we can all sit around and physically do stuff together, we can more easily communicate than if we have to do it through Skype or what have you. Now, much of these things actually are quite natural to product designers, but it's not always common knowledge in human-computer interface design. And it's of course great and interesting that product designers and human media interaction and people from interactive technology are more and more coming together and collaborating with each other. Whereas before, these were really two different fields, different companies, different traditions, different ways of education. So here's some resources if you want to read more on this. One really good site is the Interaction Design Foundation. So that's going to help you a lot also later by doing research on all kinds of topics. They have nice introduction websites and everything. And this book is also really recommended if you want to dive more into the philosophy and theory behind this. All right, so so to get back to this classical idea of the computer interface to digital information or the control panel to a machine and the telephone as a sort of interface between two people, we can now add the tangible interface. And the tangible interface is, if you wish, it's another kind of computer interface. And it looks a little bit like the classical control panel. It has some elements of that, but actually the classical control panel is not using tangible principles all that much because you see all these buttons look the same. And in tangible interaction, what you want to do is make the physical form mean something, right? Which you can see here. The physical form immediately has a sort of direct intuitive meaning to what it does. And that's the tangible interface. And moreover, the tangible interface does connect to digital information, just like the graphical interface. So you have this computer interface to digital information. It used to be graphical, and now it's also tangible. It's a new way of interacting with digital information. So maybe it's a good time to have a short break now. And some questions you can think about is what is, if you do your own design projects, if you're designing interaction, Maybe you've been focusing a lot on digital interaction or graphical screen inside a bigger system. If you look at the whole system, what would be the whole interface in your project? Like if you look at the whole thing altogether, what is everything that should actually belong to the definition of the interface and not just the screen elements in it? Do you have any tangible interaction already in your design? Could there be tangible interaction in your design if you considered this? If you have a screen with visual information and graphical interface elements, why is this on a screen? Why is this a graphical interface element? Can it also be another kind of interaction doing the same function, serving the same purpose? For example, a tangible. And in general, given people's rich bodily skills, could you connect to that more strongly? Could you make use of that more deliberately and explicitly in the design of your interaction? See you in a bit. So we've looked at tangible interaction as an alternative to graphical interaction, and that's cool and interesting, but we can take a further step. But in order to do that, we have to really move beyond the idea of interface altogether. So some of these weird examples that I gave earlier, like the door as an interface to another space or the table as something to sit around, um, they already question this whole idea of interface, right? Interface would mean that there's me, and then on the other side there's digital information or a computer, right? And that what you need to design is how you interact with the computer or how the computer interacts with you. But maybe for some smart systems, interactive digital systems that are not just a computer program, but they are much more. They are like a collection of smart objects or an intelligent thing like a robot or what have you, or a whole machine that becomes an extension of your body. Maybe for such kinds of weird other kinds of artifacts, the idea of interfaces just doesn't work that well. Maybe we need to look beyond the interface and not just look at a new type of interface, but create new ways of thinking about interacting with technology um, as such. And that's what I want to bring you now. And I'm going to give you four different conceptual frames. So a conceptual frame means this is a way of thinking about what you're doing. Yeah. And to think about computer technology, there's not just one way of thinking about it. There's many ways you can think about computer technology. And I'm going to give you four new ways of thinking about designing the interaction with technology. And these are the four ways I'm going to give them and then some examples of each of them. So one way to look at it is that you're not interacting with a computer so much, you're interacting with the world and you're using the whole computer as an extension of your body. So this corresponds a little bit to the blind man in his cane or the guy who was operating the big crane, the crane operator. Yeah, so here the interface becomes sort of an extension of yourself through which you interact with the rest of the world. And the interface is not just a way for you to interact with digital information as such. A second way to look at it, and it looks a little bit like the table example, is that the interface becomes actually a sort of a space, a platform on which two people can act together, and through acting on the same space together, they can collaborate or work together or make sense of stuff together. Yeah, if we both, like a whiteboard, we both draw on the whiteboard at the same time, and we look at what the other person is doing, and so we create something together. And the interface is more like a space, a workspace for more than one people. A bit related, but still different. The interface can also be a background. So I draw it here. So I'm interacting with the world, but I'm interacting with something. I'm doing something here, but there's a certain ambient background to it that gives context or meaning to what I'm doing here, right? So oh, I'm trying to I'm trying to not hit that car and decide whether I can cross or I have to wait before the car is going. But these lights here are sort of giving a context to my question that I'm trying to solve, like, is this car first or am I going to go first? Right? So the lights are in the background helping me decide on that. And then finally, as we already saw, there's this way in which the technology as a whole, so the tangible and digital and interactive, the whole thing, the whole shebang, can be another agent, another social being, like something a little bit like myself, like I'm interacting with the other thing as if I'm interacting with another person directly, which is what you would usually call a social robot. But as said, I'm not going to go into that because you probably get a lot of information on social robots already. So I'm going to focus on the first three. Let's go. So artifact as an extension of the body. Well, so the blind man's cane is already an example of that. But here is a movie of a tool called Music, which is meant for the background idea here was that people no longer engage with music in a very active way. You click on things in your music list, in your playlist, and you click and you click and you click, and it becomes a very passive thing. And many people are not skilled in making music themselves, so you don't never not everybody plays the violin. So this was a tool with which you can play be more actively and creative in listening to pre-recorded MP3 music tracks. So it's sort of a mix between listening to your Spotify list and playing an instrument. Another example is this one. Jelle Steenstra augmented speed skate. What he did was he was sort of augmenting the body of the skater, and not simply the body like skates. For it, the skates are already themselves sort of augmentations of your body, right, to go on ice. But here it was more what he was augmenting was the loop between what you're doing and what you're perceiving. So what he did was he made the skates in such a way that when you press with a certain pressure and when you stand in a certain way on the skate, this continuously changes a sound that is given to you through headphones. So when you're skating, you're constantly hearing like, which was directly related to what you were doing and how you were standing on your skates. And through by tuning in gradually, like very subconsciously, so it was not a conscious thing that the sound would sort of mean something directly to you, but the sound would just constantly be there, first as sort of random noise, and then over time your brain sort of picks up the patterns and you start to use that information in order to correct your posture and become a better skater. So it really was an extra sense. You would get an extra sense of your own body and of your own activity. Second thing was an artifact as a shared social space. So this is like the platform workspace kind of idea. And a nice example of which I will also show a short movie is this one by Sergei Yorda and colleagues in Barcelona, the Reactable, which is a very nice way of making music together, digital music. And the interesting thing here is that people standing around this table together working on it, they are able to improvise and help each other and respond to each other as an improvisation, which is very different from when you in digital music are sort of completely thinking about things on beforehand and really setting everything, like making more like editing or making a movie almost, right? Here it was really on the fly, in the moment, in the audience, creating great new sounds. And it was even the case, as Sergei Yorda once said that during a lecture, that the people that became skilled in playing this would invent new names for certain moves and then start to use those names in order to encourage each other, like do a wobble or a wibble, or I don't know what the names were, and people in that community would start to know what that means. Like, and I'm thinking of, for example, skateboarding as another example where somebody at some point invented the word ollie kickflip, and now everybody knows what that is. But of course, that didn't come from outside. That came from seeing other people do stuff, and then at some point you need a name in order to tag that one thing that one person is doing in order to tell the other person, like, oh, did you see what he was doing? Oh, he was doing the thing again. Let's call it an ollie kickflip.
uh, based on a table. The Reactable started as a project 2 years ago, and as unlike many projects which involve a lot of technology, it started from a concept and not from a technology. So first we knew what we wanted to build, and then we discovered how to build it.
Another example that's a Dutch example is for people with dementia and also used for other target groups, the tovertafel, so the magic table. And because there's a projection in the center between people, and this projection elicits action. It moves in certain ways so that people start to move their hands and start to try to grab stuff and touch it and respond to it. But then, of course, also once some people, once like suppose this guy is starting to do it, then of course the other people see him do stuff, and so they are, because it's public and it's a space, it's a workspace. You see other people responding to the information, so you start to respond to the information as well, right? So you also get a sort of social interaction process that you don't have when everybody's looking at their own little screens, right? And just think about this interface, and then think about how you sit at home or with friends or with family, and everybody is nowadays sitting looking at their own little screens, right? Not seeing what the other person is doing. Just let that sink in for a moment. That's the world that we're designing today, right? We're not designing this world. I mean, we're designing this world, but this is an exception. The bigger world that we're designing is one in which everybody cannot see what other people are doing. And I think that's not good. That's we can do better there. Finally, I want to show this example as a sort of a combination of bodily extension and social interaction. So here a person is interacting with the car socially. Well, so in that sense, actually like a social robot kind of thing. You're talking with the car as a social robot. But the thing is also an extension of yourself. So it's like it's almost more like that you and the robot as a social partner also become a new whole, a, a, a pair that is so tuned into each other, like I don't know, like two cops from a cop movie that are so completely they know each other blindly. So I don't know if that's English, but they know each other so well that they don't even have to look what the other person is doing because they sense that the other person is moving left and right, and they act as one, right? And this interface is meant to make sure that you and the car act as one, and you transfer control back and forth in a very fluid way without any explicit um, uh, deliberate button presses like give command over to car or take back control from car, because that is difficult. That is if you have to suddenly decide whether you want to let the car do the driving or you, that's difficult, right? So you want to have this kind of fluent, intuitive, subconscious interaction that makes you and the car work together as partners and completely intuitive. And finally, also this example, just to highlight that we are, of course, in a university where we design scientific things that are evidence-based and so on, and engineered and all very nice. We sometimes forget that interaction in the broadest sense is to a large extent not about cognitive information processing, sending messages, being functional, solving the task, doing things optimal, efficient, and so on. Very often it's about things like intimacy, emotion, being together, being in touch with each other, quite literally. So this is a design of an interactive garment that lingerie that changes color due to touch, which mediates the interaction between two people in a very different way than one person telling the other person, I'll be home at 5, right? And then finally, artifacts as part of the ambient background. So this was the idea that I'm interacting with something, but in the periphery, there's also interactive stuff happening. Sometimes we call this ubiquitous computing or ambient intelligence. And but ambient intelligence is often used to create something that does the job for you automatically, so you don't have to think about it. This is not what I mean here. It's not that the ambient background is doing its thing completely autonomous apart from me, right? Because then I'm not interacting with it anymore, right? So if you think about this interactive home that will automatically play your favorite song when you walk in, that's not what I mean. What I mean is that it does things that help you do the task that you're doing, but not by being in your face, but being more in a subtle way in the background. But it's still, you're still aware of it and you're still also using it, but you're not using it in the front of your eyes, so to speak. So one example, classic example by Bill Gaver, very good design researcher, is the history tablecloth. So what he did was he observed that people in the 1990s already, families were spending less and less time with each other around the kitchen table, which used to be a quite important center moment for families to reconnect and be together and exchange what they did, right? So you sit around the table, you eat, and you say, "How was your day?" Right? That's basically, of course, it still happens, but a lot of times people have different schedules. They go to sport, work, whatever, and what you end up is with individual people sitting at that table, but other people just having left or coming later. So what they did, what they thought, what if the table becomes a kind of a trace itself of activity that has taken place at the table. So it's as if you have this kind of after image of somebody just having been there, and then when the next person comes, they still see a little bit of what had just happened at the table, so that you still have this feeling of a bond of being together. Of okay, so I'm not alone. I'm alone right now, but I'm really not alone in this house. This is still a family, and or what have you. So you put stuff on the table, and when you take it away, it leaves a visual trace of that stuff was on the table. But it's very subtle. There's no indicated meaning. There's no message. It's not a sticky note with saying, "Oh, I'll be home at 5." There's nothing that has any explicit message or anything. It's just a little change in the environment, and you hardly notice it. But if it would not be there, you would definitely notice it, right? So it sort of does its thing in the background. A related example also by Saskia Bakker, she calls this peripheral interaction, which already indicates the whole idea of it, that it's peripheral. Suppose you have a system of little lights, you can see them here, on the tables of all the children in an elementary school. The children work in groups. They do a lot of things autonomously on their own. Maybe different groups do different things. But the teacher needs to manage the classroom as a whole. They walk around and they would sometimes need to intervene and say, "Hey guys in the back, you're talking way too loud. You're making much too way noise." Or, "Hey, how about you? Are you still, do you know what to do? Do you know what assignment you're working on? Or you look confused or you're not doing anything?" Or, "Hey, oh, you're already finished. You can go to the next assignment." So all that kind of managing stuff is, of course, creating more noise for the other people in the classroom. And so to make it more calm and peaceful and smooth, these little lights take over that function, and the teacher can press little buttons, changing the lights on the tables, indicating to the group working there, hey, you guys are talking too loud. They would see the light and change their behavior, but in a very subtle way. There would not be like this shouting through the room, and you just see the light, oh, and immediately, without even having to say anything about it, you could go on with your work. So that was a very nice thing. And of course, like if it were up to me personally, I would make it that what the lights mean would be decided by the classroom. So it would be a democratic decision and not just a teacher control tool. And also the teacher now has the controls, but of course it would be great if around this light every table group had some control over their own lights, maybe of lights of others, so that it would really be like a distributed system of control and not just top down from the teacher to the students. But that's another matter. One example from myself and lots of students who have worked on this for years, also with little lights, a bit like the other example actually, but this is for a quite different purpose. So here the idea is that for autistic people that live independently but need some form of care for their daily activities and tasks and things they want to do. They often don't manage to do that all on their own, or they get stuck in things and get frustrated, or anxiety creeps up, or they don't have an oversight anymore about all the different things, and chaos comes in their heads. So to help them a little bit with that, we designed together with a number of autistic people that helped us design this tool, a kind of task list. It's a task list that tells you when to do what, but the task, there's never an explicit list, and there's also never an explicit instruction, do this or do that. The only thing what is there is a system of little lights that you can put in your own apartment at the place where you want to do a certain task at a certain time. You can program the lamp to go on at that certain time. And then, so for example, when the light goes on in the kitchen at 11 o'clock in the morning, this would signal to you that it would be time to do the dishes. You have yourself designed that. You have yourself decided that you want to do the dishes at 11 o'clock. The light is not telling you do the dishes. It's only saying, hey, you, look here in the kitchen. And so you look in the kitchen and you think, oh yeah, the dishes, I need to do the dishes, right? Because you're not stupid, you're only often distracted. So that's the problem. You know what to do and you know how to do it, but you're distracted and you don't get around of actually doing it. So the light is just grabbing your attention, but it's leaving you free to do it in your own way, at your own pace, in your own manner, right? So you are still in control of what you want to do, and you're not sort of slavishly following a task list that a supervisor has made for you or what have you. That's the idea of this. So this is like a distributed system of control, distributed lights in the room that trigger you to attend to something new during the day, right? And what's also important about this example is that the light itself is not the complete interface. You could say that it's not providing all the information. The light in the kitchen is only saying, look here, and it's the kitchen itself and the dishes that need to be done, which are telling you what needs to be done, right? So it's the stuff, the task itself and all the objects that belong to it, they are telling you what needs to be done. And it's not like a little screen with a message in a separate interface giving you this information. Yeah. So the digital information is really integrated into the physical room, because the physical room, your own room with all the artifacts and all the stuff in it, they already give you a lot of information. The only point is that they often also distract you from what you should look at. So these lights just help you look at the right things in your own room, and they don't give any other extra information on top of that. So, a summary of the embodied interaction and the whole thing together. We have first looked at traditional interfaces, and we have seen that the common sense way of looking at interfaces is that there's something, the user on the one side, and there's something else, some process on the other side, a digital process or a mechanical process or another person. And the interface bridges the user to the other side in some way, right? And often it's digital information. We've added to that traditional picture a new form of interaction. So this is still an interface, a tangible interface, and it's still between a user and digital information in this case, but it's just an alternative to the graphical interface. And there were some reasons why tangible interfaces may be more intuitive, making use of the way we have biologically evolved to manipulate physical objects. So you can use that in designing more user-friendly interfaces to digital information. But we've also looked at going way beyond the whole idea of the interface at all as such, and looking at embodied interaction more generally. So how do our bodies interact with the world, and what kind of role could digital interaction and digital technology play in the way that we interact with the world at large? And this could be, for example, by making digital interaction as a sort of new forms of making new kinds of loops between you and the world, new kinds of sensors, new, let's say the new kind of blind man stick, but then one that uses computer technology to do all kinds of crazy stuff that physical objects cannot do, right? Feeling at a distance and so on. There's also, you can also, relative to the traditional table, you could think about digital information augmenting objects and spaces so that people can work together in better ways, collaborate in a shared workspace. Digital information could add a lot there too, relative to the traditional physical workspace. You could also put digital information more in the background of our physical world so that we can still interact with the physical world in the way we normally do, but the digital information adds some kind of pointers or ambient information that just nudges us into the right direction at the right moment at the right time. And finally, what we have not talked about explicitly, but you could think about how digital information could be combined with physical stuff to create complete uh, agents of themselves that we interact with in a social way as we would with other people. That's the end of the show. So click to exit.